Hey, this is Derek, and you're listening to Skepticality, the official audio program of Skeptic Magazine, for Tuesday, January 8th, 2013.
Skepticality. Science!
Welcome back to another episode of Skepticality, and Happy New Year. It looks like all of us, or at least most of us, survived yet another one of those end-of-the-world predictions. Later on in this episode, I have on Sharon Hill. She runs the website Doubtful News. Since she runs a site which reports on all things skeptical and things that skeptics love, and things that are newsworthy that skeptics should keep their eye on, I thought, well, all these things in the past year and upcoming are things that she might know about. So, before that, I give you your New Year's gift, the return of Tim Farley, with a look back at the past year from a skeptical perspective.
Hey look, it's Tim Farley of whatstheharm.net and skeptools.com. Yep, I'm back, and this is Skepticism, Past and Future. Since this is the first segment of the new year, we'll look back at what personalities related to skepticism we lost during 2012. And then we'll look forward to 2013 at all the great conferences that are coming up this year. The end of one year and the beginning of the next are oftentimes for retrospection. And so I often take this time to think about the people we've lost in skepticism, both our beloved skeptics and the people on the other side who we have battled. I actually do this twice each year. I also create a slideshow for the amazing meeting each July that memorializes people with photos. The one from TAM 2012 is posted, and we'll link to it in the show notes. So I don't want to run down a long list of names, as there are about 70 of them, but let's call out a few and note in particular some of the people we've lost between TAM and the end of the year. Of course, Paul Kurtz was certainly the most influential skeptic we lost this year on October 20th. Aside from founding PsyCop, he also helped create the Center for Inquiry, the Council for Secular Humanism, and much more. Another titan we lost over in England was Sir Patrick Moore of The Sky at Night, a well-known popularizer of astronomy and debunker of UFOs. Two other skeptics we lost worked to popularize or report on science. The first was Leon Jaroff, who wrote a column called Skeptical Eye for Time and later in Discover magazine, which he also created. The other was Sergei Kapitsa, who edited the Russian edition of Scientific American and hosted a TV show whose name translates as Evident but Incredible. Several rank-and-file skeptics or freethinkers were lost this year, including Joe Fox and Mr. Skinny, Kernier, and Brian S.I., all regulars at the JREF Forum. And, of course, James Durand, who was one of the co-founders of the Australian Skeptics. Over in the Believer column, people who were lost included the Reverend Sun Myung Moon of the Unification Church, which some consider a cult, and Martin Fleischmann, who in 1989 helped create the whole cold fusion press storm. And, of course, there were several other pseudoscientists, astrologers, psychics, and others who passed on. In lieu of a complete list here, watch for a post on the JREF blog at randi.org in the next few days, in which I will list all of the names that I have collected. The very first time this segment became past and future, instead of just skeptic history, was Skepticality number 179 last March. In that episode, I talked about a conference information website called Lanyard. especially at TAM 2012 last July, but also at several other skeptic events last year. Lanyard was used to allow attendees to access the conference schedule on their smartphones and to find the Twitter handles of speakers, as well as many other things. I think it is a wonderful tool for this. It has many other uses as well, such as capturing and documenting the history of skeptic conferences, promoting the books written by speakers, and so on. But as is often the case, there's kind of a chicken and egg situation here. People won't enter their information on the site unless they see the value of the site, but the value only becomes obvious once many people enter information. Because entering information on Lanyard is crowdsourced, just like Wikipedia, I decided to jumpstart this process. During my skeptic sabbatical the last few weeks, I haven't been totally idle. I did rest some, but I've also on occasion been entering data into Lanyard. I've entered historical information on over 50 past skeptic conferences. I've entered many skeptical books and connected them to their authors, and I've created links to over 500 videos from these past conferences. You can browse all this info by searching for speaker name, by keyword, by topic, and so on. But I've also organized all this into what Lanyard calls a guide, which of course I've titled Skepticism. I'll link to it in the show notes. By clicking around on the site from my Skepticism guide, you can see the compelling result. For example, early last year, if you had clicked on Joe Nichols' name, you wouldn't see much detail. Now you are presented with 11 different conferences Joe has spoken at, 7 videos of him from 4 different conferences, several photos and links where you can purchase several of his books. So now Lanyard is truly valuable as a way to browse both the history and the future of skeptical conferences. Looking at the upcoming year 2013 in the Skepticism Guide, there are already 22 major events scheduled, including 6 skeptic camps and conferences in the U.S., Canada, England, Sweden, Germany, and Australia. And there are still several events for later in the year who have not yet announced their 2013 dates. Coming up in the winter and spring, we've got skeptic camps in Phoenix, Ottawa, Chicago, 2 in Colorado, and 1 in Australia. In April, we've got the 3rd QED in Manchester, England, and the 5th Nexus event in New York City. A new trend we're seeing, started by Skepticon in Missouri, is the advent of major conferences that are free to attend, 2 of which are Skeptics of Oz in Wichita in March and Skeptech in Minneapolis in April, at which I will be speaking. There's much more on the site. If you'd like to attend a skeptic event this year, I encourage you to visit the guide and plan out your trip. If you're the organizer of a skeptic, atheist, or free thought conference, I would encourage you to use Lanyard to promote and document your event. You can log into the site and claim your event, which will enable several special features. It's a great service to offer your attendees, and it's totally free. And anyone else using the site, keep in mind it works just like Wikipedia. If you see something that's missing or wrong, you can log in and correct it. Help me maintain all this data a little bit at a time. Just use your Twitter or LinkedIn identity and dive in. And this brings us to the end of another edition of Skepticism Past and Future. Links to additional material are in the show notes, and follow me on Twitter or Facebook under the name Krelnick, Krelnik, where I post a daily fact from skepticism's past and ongoing news of skepticism's future.
This is Bob Carroll. Welcome to another episode of Unnatural Virtue. Today's topic is organic food and farming. Organic food is food produced by organic farming, which is a set of techniques based on anti-scientific beliefs, myths, and superstitions. I'll refer to the proponents of organic food who oppose conventional farming and food as the organics. First, a little history. The term organic as a descriptor for certain sustainable agricultural systems was used by Lord Northbourne in his 1940 book, Look to the Land. Northbourne used the term to describe farming systems that focused on the farm as a dynamic, living, balanced, organic whole, or an organism. The term organic was first widely used in the United States by J.I. Rodale, founder of Rodale Press, in the 1950s. Unfortunately, Rodale failed to convince scientists of the validity of his approach because of his reliance on what were perceived to be outrageous unscientific claims of organic farming's benefits. Sir Albert Howard, who lived from 1873 to 1947, was a founder and pioneer of the organic movement. He believed in what he called the law of return. He advocated recycling all organic waste materials, including sewage sludge, in farmland compost. The practice of adding human and animal feces to the soil is an ancient practice found in many cultures even today. The fact that these cultures developed their practices without benefit of modern knowledge of such things as bacteria or heavy metals is trumped for the organics by the romantic notion that farm life was idyllic in those times and places when life expectancy was half of what it is today and when the human population was a fraction of what it is now. Rudolf Steiner, the founder of a set of superstitious agricultural practices known as biodynamics, also advocated using manure as fertilizer, but it had to be prepared according to a magical formula based on his belief that cosmic forces entered animals through their horns. Like other organics, Steiner romanticized farming. Commenting on some peasants stirring up manure, he said, "I've always had the opinion that the peasants' alleged stupidity or foolishness is wisdom before God, that is to say, before the Spirit. I have always considered what the peasants and farmers thought about their things far wiser than what the scientists were thinking." Steiner gave lectures on farming, but apparently felt no need to do scientific research to test his ideas, since apparently he felt that all that was needed was to observe the peasants and their practices. Steiner thought in terms of a self-nourishing farm organism and opposed bringing in outside materials such as chemical fertilizers. All a farm needs is manure and compost and planting according to the movement of the moon and planets. Steiner opposed the use of synthetic fertilizers and pesticides, not on scientific grounds, but on spiritual grounds. He claimed there were spiritual shortcomings in the whole chemical approach to farming. The organics believe that pesticides and fertilizers are so harmful that they should be avoided unless they are natural. This belief is contradicted by the vast majority of scientific studies that have been done on these subjects. The most dangerous bacteria in America's food supply is E. coli, which is found in abundance in cattle manure, a favorite natural fertilizer of organic farming. The residues from pesticides on food, natural or synthetic, are not likely to cause harm to consumers because they occur in minute quantities. Almost all of the pesticides we ingest in food are naturally produced by plants to defend themselves against insects, fungi, and animal predators. Natural fertilizers and pesticides do not make organic foods safer. Organics also claim that organic food is more nutritious than conventionally produced food. Several studies have shown that this claim is also false. The only difference between conventionally produced food and organic food is in the way they're grown, handled, processed, labeled, marketed, and priced. You have to admire the way organics have marketed their product. The organic share of the food industry is still relatively puny, about 2.5%, but it's been growing at about 15% a year for the past 10 years. The organic food industry in the United States is valued at about $14 billion and is expected to increase to $23 billion over the next few years, which may explain why even Walmart is pushing organic food these days. The evidence for the superiority of organic food is mostly anecdotal and based more on irrational assumptions and wishful thinking than on hard scientific evidence. There's no significant difference between a natural molecule and one created in the laboratory. Being natural or organic does not make a substance safe, nor does being synthetic make a substance unsafe. Organic food does not offer special protection against cancer or any other disease. Organic food is not healthier than food produced by conventional farming, using synthetic pesticides and herbicides. There is scant scientific evidence that most people can tell the difference in taste between organic and conventional foods. The bottom line is, fresher is better. Organic produce that travels thousands of miles to market is generally inferior to the same produce from local farmers, organic or not. Organics oppose genetically engineered food, despite the fact that nature has been genetically engineering all organisms on Earth, including plants and animals, from the beginning of life on our planet. Is there good evidence that genetic engineering of food should be avoided? No. All GM crops are rigorously tested for toxins and allergens before being licensed for use. Organics have aroused a lot of fear about GM crops, often of the very vague variety. It's possible that some damage might be done at some time to somebody. Some of the fears raised are very specific, however, but it would take too long to deal with them here. Check my Skeptics Dictionary entry for organic food and farming for a lengthy discussion of the propaganda put out by the organics. Well, that's it for this episode of Unnatural Virtue. To find out more about the topics mentioned here, see the show notes. In the meantime, please commit some unnatural acts in public. And don't forget, skepticism, though unnatural, is a virtue.
Hello, this is Susan Gerbic speaking to you from the comfort of my library about the most exciting skeptical activism project you can do from your home, Guerrilla Skepticism on Wikipedia. The majority of skeptics have held irrational beliefs at one time, and hopefully we've gotten over it. We know that people change their minds when they're ready to change their minds. Let's say a coworker thinks he's vaccinating his child using homeopathy. You try to explain and even get a little bit emotional. Your friend agrees to think over your points at home. He Googles homeopathy that night, and the first hit he receives is a link to the English Wikipedia page for homeopathy. What is waiting for him better give the facts, the scientific facts, and in such a way that it's readable to the layperson. In this case, within the first paragraph, your friend will read, quote, "Scientific research has found homeopathic remedies ineffective and their postulated mechanisms of action implausible. Within the medical community, homeopathy is generally considered to be quackery," unquote. If your friend is ready to listen to the scientific point of view, then this will go a long way towards starting him on the right path. If further interested, he will be able to follow many hyperlinks and citations we have left there for him to read, like a trail of breadcrumbs. The public opposition section of the page has many references, including to the JREF and CFI. There are also links to the 1023 campaign and videos of mass suicides by homeopathy. Now listen carefully, because this is the really important part. A well-written blog or podcast might bring in a few hundred or even several thousand hits during its time in the blog sphere. Almost all will be to people in the skeptical choir. The English Homeopathy Wikipedia page gets over 4,000 views a day, every day. In November 2012, the homeopathy page received over 120,000 views. That's over 1.4 million views a year, every year. And we should not only be interested in English Wikipedia pages, but all other languages as well. Homeopathy and other pseudosciences are of interest to readers worldwide. This is one of the reasons why the Guerrilla Skepticism on Wikipedia project might be one of the most important outreach projects that exist in our community. All we need is you and you and you. We train, join us. Juntos si se puede. Visit our blog at Guerrilla Skepticism on wikipedia.blogspot.com or contact me at susangerbic@yahoo.com. Thank you.
I'm Heather Henderson, and this is the News in Religion. The Church of England has lifted a ban on gay male clergy who live with their partners from becoming bishops on condition they pledge to stay celibate. The Church said the House of Bishops, one of its most senior bodies, had ended an 18-month moratorium on the appointment of gays in civil partnerships as bishops. Gay clergy in civil partnerships would be eligible for the position of bishop if they make the pledge to remain celibate, as is already the case for gay deacons and priests. The review came a year after a gay cleric living in a civil partnership was reportedly blocked from becoming a bishop in South London. This just goes to show how pliable religion can be. Either the Bible is the absolute word of God, or it's a book full of stories that can be interpreted an infinite number of ways. The Church of England has 100 million followers worldwide. I wonder if any hearing this story are questioning the value of such an illogical belief system. Saudi Arabia's top cleric on Friday warned against the mixing of genders, saying it poses a threat to female chastity in society as the kingdom prepares for the first time to grant women seats on the country's top advisory body. The move by King Abdullah to allow women a voice on the Shura Council is part of a larger reform effort by the monarchy to give women greater space in the public sphere. Last year, the kingdom began enforcing a law that allows women to work in female apparel and lingerie stores. Religious leaders have spoken out against such reforms. The country is guided by an ultra-conservative interpretation of Islam called Wahhabism. In the kingdom, women cannot travel, work, study abroad, marry, get divorced, or gain admittance to a public hospital without permission from a male guardian, typically a husband, brother, father, or uncle. The Saudi government has not said how many women will be given seats on the Shura Council. Some local papers have suggested that women would be separated from the men in the assembly hall by a barrier, while others have suggested that women communicate via an internal video system. As an American woman, I have a problem understanding a religion where women are covered head to toe and not given the same freedoms as men. I hope the reforms continue and that eventually the women of Saudi Arabia will be free to work and live any way they choose. Even more repressive, but funny, a Catholic priest in Illinois has reportedly taken a leave of absence after he called 911 to seek help with a pair of handcuffs. During the call, Reverend Tom Donovan, who was in the church rectory at the time, explained to the dispatcher that he had been playing with the handcuffs and was having trouble getting them off. After arriving, police also found some sort of gag on the priest. In December, the State Journal-Register reported that Donovan had been granted a leave of absence to address personal issues. This is a perfect example of how the religiously indoctrinated sometimes lack critical thinking. But the fact is, logic failed the good reverend in a most embarrassing and significant way. Let's simply take the story at face value. You're a priest alone, in a church with handcuffs, no key, and a gag. I mean, come on, Tom. Who do you think you're fooling? I'm Heather Henderson, and this was The News and Religion. Visit my other podcasts at ardentatheist.com and skepticallyyours.net. Special thanks to my audio engineer, Emery. The News and Religion was brought to you through the scientific method.
Last year, Houston cancer quack Stanislaw Brzezinski made headlines around the world when someone he had hired issued legal threats to bloggers who'd called him out for charging patients hundreds of thousands of dollars apiece to enroll in apparently unpublishable clinical trials for over 35 years. Help the Skeptics for the Protection of Cancer Patients raise funds for St. Jude Children's Research Hospital by going to thehoustoncancerquack.com. We want to raise at least $30,000, the cost of enrolling in one of these trials, and are donating the money to St. Jude in Stanislaw Brzezinski's name. On Brzezinski's 70th birthday, January 23rd, we're going to issue a challenge to the Brzezinski Clinic to match the total funds raised by skeptics and supporters of sound science. Visit thehoustoncancerquack.com and give until it hurts. His bottom line. You'll also be able to find tips about how to get reliable information about cancer treatments and clinical trials into the search results of people looking for Brzezinski. Whether or not Brzezinski chooses to participate in our fundraiser, we'll be able to say that this is probably the greatest thing ever accomplished for cancer research in his name.
I'm Eve Siebert from SkepticalHumanities.com. In When They Severed Earth from Sky, How the Human Mind Shapes Myth, by archaeologist and linguist Elizabeth Wayland Barber and folklorist Paul T. Barber, the authors attempt to find the origins of myth and folklore in natural events. In 2004, Wayland Barber gave a talk of the same name to the Skeptics Society as part of the Distinguished Speakers Lecture Series. The book is flawed in a number of ways. In attempting to explain the significance of the golden calf, for instance, the Barber seemed to suggest that the story of the Exodus has some historical validity, although there is little evidence to back this up. They also argue that flood stories are really about the precession of the equinoxes. One of the methods the Barbers use to find the origins of various stories is what they call the stripping procedure. As they describe it, in order to understand the true original events, we have to see clearly what the events are. In order to do that, we must strip away the explanations from the story. That is to say, they seek to separate actual events and observation from interpretations or explanations for those events. Paul Barber used this technique very effectively in his 1988 book, Vampires, Burial, and Death, Folklore and Reality. Looking at official reports of the exhumation and examination of alleged vampires, Barber would separate observation, such as the statement that the corpse had liquid blood on its lips, from explanation, that the corpse had sucked that blood from victims. The use of this procedure is more problematic when the Barbers attempt to apply it to literary works. Where do you draw a line between events and explanation in a poem like Beowulf? As far as we know, very few of the events it records actually occurred. How do you draw that line, and does it have any real meaning after it has been drawn? The Barbers argue that the Germanic fire-breathing dragons are nothing more than fire, specifically fire ignited from gases released when a sealed tomb has been opened. In Beowulf, they list the events of the dragon episode as follows. 1. Someone steals a cup from an old barrow. 2. Fire erupts from the barrow and spreads. 3. Near the stone entrance, our hero stabs blindly at the source of flames while shielding himself ineffectively from them. 4. It smells bad. 5. People stab deeper and eventually the flame goes out. 6. Inside the barrow is treasure but no trace of a dragon's body. They claim that no one ever sees an actual dragon, only fire. The dragon must be a figment of explanation, a willer invisible except for its fiery exhalations, postulated to explain the presence of that barrier of flames, they say. Much of their argument rests on one brief passage. After Beowulf and his young kinsman Wiglaf have killed the dragon, Beowulf, mortally injured, asks Wiglaf to examine the dragon's hoard and bring back treasures to show him. Wiglaf sees many treasures, but no body because, as the poem says, the dragon had been destroyed by the sword. However, the poem very strongly suggests that there is more than just fire to the dragon. It is often referred to as coiled, a term more appropriate to a reptile than to a conflagration. Beowulf doesn't die from burns or smoke inhalation, but from a bite from the creature's venomous fangs. Even the Barbers admit that there is a later reference to the dragon's corpse. Beowulf's men push it over a cliff into the sea, but they consider this explanation rather than event because the story keepers are so sure that a tangible creature must have existed. They consider the two passages contradictory and assume that the one that suggests there is no body is event, and the one that insists there is a body is explanation. In fact, the two passages are not contradictory. Another passage also mentions the dragon's body and its position. Beowulf's slayer also lay dead, the terrible earth dragon, bereft of life, oppressed by evil. The coiled worm could no longer control the ring hoard, for iron edges had carried him off, hard, battle-sharp remnant of hammers, so that the far flyer, stilled by wounds, fell on the ground near the hoard. Wiglaf doesn't see the dragon's body when he inspects the hoard because the body is near the hoard, not on the hoard. For 300 years no one could get to the hoard because the dragon was lying on it. Now it is dead near its hoard, so Wiglaf can get access to the hoard. Two passages clearly indicate that there is a body. One passage could suggest that there is no body, but only if you twist it to fit a specific theory. Is it possible that marsh gases from sealed graves played a role in the evolution of the fire-breathing dragon? Perhaps, but I think it's clear that there's more to the story than this. More importantly, though, the Barbers stripped down Beowulf to a point that it is no longer Beowulf. Claiming there's no dragon in Beowulf is about as useful as claiming there's no vampire in Dracula. The Barbers are not simply removing interpretation from observation. They're stripping away anything that doesn't fit their theory and overemphasizing anything that they think does support their ideas. They are cherry-picking data, and to a large extent they are telling their own story, not the one the Anglo-Saxon poet told. I recently wrote about the ways some young Earth creationists interpret the monsters in Beowulf to support their worldview. What the Barbers are doing seems precious little better. Unlike the creationists, though, they are real scholars. They should do better. For more on Beowulf, the Dragon, and the Barbers, visit Skepticalhumanities.com at an internet near you.
Hello and welcome to The Odds Must Be Crazy on Skepticality, where we talk about life, the universe, and everything. Assuming people submit crazy stories about those topics.
I'm Wendy Hughes.
And I'm Jarrett Kaufman.
And we're here to tell you stories submitted by you, our readers and listeners.
Fans, Wendy. We have wonderful, supportive, attractive fans.
You're laying it on thick today.
Just like a good warm-up act, it helps to put our audience in a good mood before you begin.
I agree. So with that, let's start. Today's story is a real bell ringer, contributed by Skepticality listener Nick Ward. You can find it on our site starting today by searching for 321 or by clicking on the link in the show notes. Nick writes,
Listening to your segment on Skepticality reminded me of a TOMBC micro moment. In high school, my friends and I were very nerdy, so we timed our watches to the beginning and ending bells for classes. Near the end of class one day, a teacher was mocking us, saying, "You guys don't time your watches to the bell, do you? Like you sit there and say 3, 2, 1, and right after he said 1 aloud, the bell rang. We all sat around dumbfounded for a few seconds and then burst out laughing. My guess is that, since we were at the end of class, we were at least within 60 seconds of the bell, so we'd be looking at a 1.6% chance, at worst, that the second he chose would be the moment of the bell."
Most of my friends are nerds, but I haven't seen anyone synchronizing their watches yet. Or maybe it's geeks? Actually, I'm not sure there's a difference.
Yes, but if your friends were all secret agents, they'd totally do that. At least, I'm assuming from movies. But anyway, that's the point, Wendy. It was just a coincidence. And our friend, statistician, and former school teacher Barbara Drescher gave us her thoughts on this one.
Here's Barbara's analysis. The author of this story recognized at least part of what makes this story easy to explain. I'm sure that it was absolutely hilarious when it happened, but it is one of those things that is more expected than unexpected.
Yep, even the submitter recognized that, but sometimes it's the funny stories that stand out the most to us, no matter how likely they are if we look too closely. That's why they're still worth looking into.
Sure, but even if it was likely, there were unknowns that the author couldn't have included. Barbara had more to say. The author doesn't state what prompted the teacher's comment, but I suspect that the teacher noticed one or more of them looking at their watches. As a teacher myself, I was often very distracted when, with about 5 minutes to go, students began to pack up their belongings. And when one student did it, others followed. Pretty soon, the whole class had that "it's time to go" feeling, and the students started walking out the door while I continued to lecture. So the chances that the bell would ring at any moment precise enough to be as funny as this was actually very, very high.
I actually never went to public school. I was homeschooled on my own peculiar schedule, so clock watching in class is kind of foreign to me.
And I've given up watch watching, too. I haven't worn one in years now that I have a smartphone to keep track for me. I don't know what I'd do without it. Probably be late to everything. I wonder if there's an app for... Oh, wait.
Thanks, as always, for listening to The Odds Must Be Crazy on Skepticality. As usual, stop by theoddsmustbecrazy.com to interact with the stories and share your own thoughts. Even the boring ones. We're not above filler.
Also, be sure to follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, circle us on Google+, and validate us in life. Hit the Submit a Story link on our site to share your own crazy stories, or tweet the short ones with the hashtag TOMBC.
The Odds Must Be Crazy is a project in collaboration with the Independent Investigations Group in Los Angeles, California. Visit them at iigwest.org.
Barbara Drescher is a contributing editor to our blog and can also be found at icbseverywhere.com. Our theme music comes to us courtesy of Mr. Deity himself, Brian Keith Dalton. You can find him at mrdeity.com.
Any last thoughts on this one before we run out of time, Wendy?
Wait a minute, I'm timing the music on my stopwatch app.
And you call me a geek.
So I am here with Sharon Hill, and you are the owner, creator, writer for Doubtful News.
Right, doubtfulnews.com.
Tell everybody a little bit about Doubtful News and what it's all about.
Well, I started this in August of 2011. I had a tweet exchange with some people and said, oh, gee, is there a news site for skeptics where we could talk about some critical thinking stories and some weird news and anomalies? And there really wasn't anything like this. So what I do is I take some strange and paranormal and pseudoscience stories that I find in the news, and I will include the original link and an excerpt from the article and maybe some skeptical commentary and add a couple extra links to information on some good information. So say if it's an alt-med article, I will provide the alternate view, which is the scientific consensus that perhaps that this alternative doesn't really work, as the news article suggested. So it's sort of a way to look at the weird news in a more skeptical light.
And it's actually real news stories, too. That's the fun part about it.
Right. I don't usually pick up blogs or anything, but if there is a good blog post on it, I will try to find the original news story and then say, here's an alternative view based on this really good blog. Somebody analyzed it, and I will include that link in there so people have some more information about it.
And because it's 2013 now, your site had a lot of news stories about the Mayan prophecy, which were both alive, and it's after the new year, so obviously that one didn't work.
That was the biggest bomb of the year, for sure.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, well, at the beginning of the year, we had a lot of strange stories about noises in the sky, like trumpets of the apocalypse. I don't know if you remember that, but those stories were great.
Yeah, back in like January,
February, right.
Yeah.
So I think people were a little on edge as the year began. They were sort of preparing for what could come. And as the year went on, there was sort of a little bump in concern about these stories. But as the year wore on, it really did slow down. I think people got sick of it, and they didn't take it as seriously.
Well, especially back at the beginning of the year, that's when the end of not a couple years ago, and then beginning of last year, we had those weird, massive numbers of certain species of animals would certainly all die, like a lot of bird deaths and things. That was also part of the 2012 thing.
It was. That was the beginning of 2011, and we had these mass animal deaths. And they come every once in a while, and people really get nervous about those. And I like to cover those stories because I'll try to dig in and find out if they ever did find out why there was this mass death. Because people just see that story and they get concerned. Was there an environmental factor? Is it something that could affect them? Should they be concerned? So what I try to do is dig in a little bit more and maybe find out what the actual cause was after they do the investigation, follow up on that.
A lot of people don't realize that those things actually happen far more often than you would think, because we live in cities, and even if you're not in a city, even rural areas, you're around people, and animals don't like to be there. So,
yeah, there could be a lot of good reasons why animals suddenly die. In one case, a pile of starlings, which are pest birds, were poisoned by a farmer. Well, they're allowed to do that, but unfortunately the birds got up and left and died in somebody else's land, and it made them upset. And of course they were poisoned, and that could be a hazard for animals that come along and eat the birds. So people don't realize that these things actually do go on. And so, yeah, I'm hoping they Google that, and we'll get to our site and maybe get some good information on it.
So other things that happened in 2012, like weird animals, like we had this giant earthworm, and
incredible weird things, and that's one of I just love stories like that, weird animals and things like that, weird dead carcasses and things like that.
A lot of those things got attributed to things like was it chupacabra and things like that.
Yeah, it wasn't a big year for chupacabra, but it always does come out in the news. Some mystery animal will be called chupacabra.
And then you touched on, you just told me about something about the living dolls. I didn't catch that one before.
Oh, this was super popular. We got a lot of hits on the website from this, but of course it went viral. It went into the tabloids, pictures of these women who either had what appeared to be plastic surgery or were very, very good with their makeup to make themselves either look like Barbie or like anime characters. And they were so odd-looking, but you're sort of fascinated by looking at them. And are they real? Is this photoshopped? But these women were very popular online, and people would Google for their pictures, and they would come to this website. And, of course, I had pieces in there that obviously some of these were photoshopped. It's just no way people could look like this. And tried to find actual pictures of the women without this Photoshop and makeup on was also interesting. So we did get some interest in stories like that, sort of the hoax aspect. Are these people real or not? Freaks are always a big draw to websites. People strangely like to look at freaks.
It's amazing because I didn't catch that one, even though once I did a little Google, I was like, how did I miss this? Because it was everywhere when it came out.
Right.
So, and then also there was a paranormal claim in New Jersey. It was settled by the People's Court. Is that the TV show?
Right. That was a great story. This couple and her 2 children moved into this house in Toms River, New Jersey. It was a rental. And they left about a week later complaining that they were having paranormal activity there. And the landlord said, I've been renting this house for 10 years and nobody's ever complained about it. So there was lawsuits thrown back and forth. And I guess they eventually agreed to settle on the People's Court. And they weren't allowed to break their lease because I don't think the court recognized that paranormal activity was a real thing. And it was pretty lame paranormal activity, actually. They called in an investigation group, and things would fall down, and the lights would flicker on and off, and they heard what sounded like footsteps. But I think that there was more behind that story than that. I think maybe if they couldn't pay their rent or it was a strange house, they were unfamiliar with it. But that was a great story that ended up on the People's Court, which was interesting.
Well, I've been trying to find out because I have to call. I still have some family who live in New Jersey because I grew up there when I was in high school. And in New Jersey, at least in South Jersey, there's a lot of houses that have signs that warn people about paranormal activity at their stores. And I never really found out if that was something they were required to do or if they did it for interest for customers. I don't know.
Well, yeah, that it is a draw. Paranormal tourism was big this year. I did notice a lot of stories where the haunting stories sounded awful manufactured.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, this ghost would appear that was never around before, and they would get it into the local newspapers, which I would see online, and read these stories, and they were like templates. They would all say the same thing. Call in your paranormal investigation team. Oh, you've got a ghost. And then it comes out in the local newspaper, and more people are interested. If it's a hotel or a restaurant or a bar, it got people interested.
It's like crop circles.
Right. You draw people's attention to it, and they're curious. They want to come and see.
Hey, continuing on with like New Jersey, there was hoax Hurricane Sandy photos.
Right. When Hurricane Sandy was barreling down on New Jersey and New York, a lot of the news was coming across on Twitter. And not only did we have these hoax photos coming out where you would see this massive bank of dark clouds coming over the Statue of Liberty, there were also these photographs of sharks swimming down the street and certain things being flooded. And some of these photos ended up they were hoax, or they were older photos, or they were from movies or whatever. And they were showing things that weren't happening, but seriously, they did make people concerned. And what was happening was they were passing on these photographs via social media. So people would think that they were real. And I think that may have caused a little bit more panic than there probably should have been. There really weren't sharks swimming down the street in New Jersey.
Even if they are, sharks don't have feet, so you can run away from them.
Yeah, just swim away.
Well, I found the Hurricane Sandy thing because like I said, I went to high school in South Jersey, and the epicenter of where Sandy hit first was basically right over my high school. So all these people that are my family that still live there, they were sending us pictures of all this stuff. And CNN, where they had all the weather people there, I was on the background of them was all the stuff I used to hang out at when I was in high school. So I was like, oh, I remember hanging out there. It's underwater now.
Oh,
yeah,
very sad.
Yeah, it was kind of sad. There's a lot of places where I loved, like where I saw pictures, they were underwater. So I was like, oh, I'll never go there again.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was very sad, but yeah, that was a very interesting set of stories I went back to revisit. I remember when all that was going on.
Right.
Now, the giant eye, I mentioned it earlier, that was a swordfish?
It was. This eyeball washed up on the beach in Pompano Beach, Florida, and it's unusual for a soft part like that to be preserved, but the people who found it put it on ice, and they took it to the local fish and game people or laboratory, and they were able to take it away and study it. Now, the first thing they looked at, I guess they could tell basically from the shape of it that it wasn't a giant squid eye or anything like that. It looked like a fish.
Yeah,
so,
I thought it was going to be a giant squid at first,
right,
and then you look at the eye; it looks more like a fish because squid actually have a different weird eye.
They have a different eye,
yeah.
Right? So you can tell just by looking at it a little bit. But they did send it away to be tested, and it ended up being a swordfish, which is a deep. They go deep and they go into dark water, so they really need these large, well-protected eyes. And apparently it was, a fisherman had caught the fish, cut the eye out, and discarded it, and it washed up on shore. But that was a couple days of speculation waiting to hear what it actually was. It was a lot of fun.
That could be a really big swordfish.
Well, it must have been. They do get really large.
Yeah. I love to eat them, so...
Somebody did. Somebody ate that one.
Now, you had on this the unidentified submerged huge object. Is that the one that looked like the Millennium Falcon?
Right. That was actually discovered back in August of last year. But in January, the story hit CNN. And the group of people, they were ship salvage companies. They go and they look for shipwrecks at the bottom, and then they recover them, and they get a portion of whatever valuable is on them. So they found this object at 80 meters down in the Baltic Sea off the coast of Sweden, and it looked really strange. But in January, when it hit CNN, it sort of sounded to me like they were looking for investors to give them money to go down and take a closer look at this. So what they were doing was sort of hyping interest and making it sound kind of mysterious. So they sent out a little submersible, and they came back with some pictures, and then it didn't really look as mysterious anymore. It was sort of like a bump with some cobbles and boulders around it.
Like the Mars face.
Sort of did look like that. But immediately when I saw it, now I'm a geologist, and when I saw it and I know the location of where this sort of occurred, and I knew that there were glaciers evident here, it looked like a glacier feature. And they continued to hype it as strange things. Every month there would be like this little story that would come out that would say, oh, it could be a Nazi war machine that was sunk off the Baltic, or it could be the conspiracy websites got kind of crazy on what it could be, the doorway to Atlantis and sorts of things.
The doorway to the hollow earth.
The hollow earth, right, with the giant plug in the bottom of the ocean. Right? Yeah. It was great. But it did turn out to be, when they finally got scientists to look at it, a year later, that's a natural feature. It's odd, but it looks natural.
Well, like I said, when you look at the Mars photo before we actually got stuff closer, it looks like a face, but when you actually see it from the other side, it's a bump.
Right. Once they got the higher resolution imagery, it didn't look so mysterious anymore.
Yeah. And there's one that's kind of closer to me that you had here on the Amelia Earhart's plane, because my first client when I had my own business was a man who actually was involved with trying to search for that plane. So I think that was an interesting story.
That mirrored a lot of the underwater UFO thing, because they were a company that was salvaging. They wanted to find this, and they were doing sort of the similar things. They were looking for investors to help them fund this project to go and search for the plane. And it's the same with this underwater UFO thing in the Baltic. They went on very little evidence or bad evidence that there was something spectacular in this location. And unfortunately, it turned out to be a bust for that, too. They didn't find what they were looking for. And they were also followed by a TV crew.
It's like the Al Capone's vault.
It was very much like that, because it turned out to be a big bust.
Well, like I said, one of my first client when I owned my own business, that's what he does for a living, as an airline archaeologist, which is actually a real job.
That's great.
Yeah, well, because a lot of people don't realize a lot of planes they disappear, even though you see them on radar, but there's a lot of space between the last radar contact and the next one. So sometimes smaller planes get lost. It happens a lot with the military, too. Mm-hmm. So people actually are airline archaeologists who go out and try to find the planes. That's what he does, and there's actually many groups who do this all the time. So trying to get investors for this, I don't know who they might be, because there's people out doing it all the time. So I have no idea who is doing that. I could find out, because I'm still in contact with the guys. So.
But yeah, there's going to be some neat things they find down there, too.
Oh, yeah.
This wasn't one of them.
I've seen pictures. Yeah. It's sometimes it's amazing the stuff they find.
Mm-hmm.
Then other things that happened last year was consumer products that happened. Like
right.
Yeah.
We like to put these stories on to let people know that as often the FDA will take action, the Federal Drug Administration will take action against some products that are on the shelf, dietary supplements in particular, some alt-med treatments. I like to do stories about traditional Chinese medicine when they're found to have actual toxic metals in them or people are hurt by them, because just putting those stories up, maybe somebody searching for that product will come across this and show that there really is harm to it. You should be very careful using these products.
And I think that's something that people don't really realize. You know, we can talk all we want about the placebo effect of Chinese medicine and the fact that it's not as good as real medicine. But the real thing is they're all on the shelf as supplements. They are not tested like real food.
Yeah, and people don't realize that. They think if they're for sale, they're safe.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily true. One of the stories that I was interested in, because it involves businesses in Pennsylvania, is the sale of raw milk.
Yeah.
Raw milk is hyped as being some sort of miracle drink where it prevents allergies and it's healthier for you. It's not. It's dangerous. There's a reason why we pasteurize milk, and there was actually some legal back and forth about whether it should be allowed to be sold. And I think people should really do some research and understand that it's not safe, and it's not safe to give to your kids. So the more that we could get those stories circulated, I think that's better.
A lot of people don't realize that, you know, there's a reason why we don't, you know, put the drinking water plant near the sewer system, and there's things we do now that are healthier, but so many people think the older days are so much better.
Right. Isn't that funny?
Yeah.
There's so many more regulations now that they're required to follow, and people are afraid of their tap water. They want to drink bottled water.
Yeah, that's my industry. I hate that.
I would go into the store, and I did a story on a certain kind of bottled water that had special minerals and things in it, and they were actually hyping this as a potential cancer cure. It was just ridiculous, and that kind of stuff really bothers me. So I try to get these stories out there to let people know that advertising is to sell products. It doesn't mean that it's what they're saying is true or has any merit.
Yeah, we have very weak rules on advertising. There's some rules to it, but you know, you can get away with a lot before anybody will complain to the right organization, so something might happen. So you have to remember when you see a commercial, you still have to be quite doubtful about what you're seeing, because it could be just completely crap.
Yep.
I mean, like the placebo ban type thing, which actually they came up on your radar from last year. You know, we had something similar here in America, and they stopped. I don't know if that was something because of the law, but I don't see them anymore here, but I don't think they got dinged legally. But
no, I don't think they did. I think they sort of fell out of favor. And one of the stories we covered was Mark Cuban, the basketball team owner, made a stink about them as well. And he said they're junk. And so we made sure to get that story out too, to let people know that even the professional athletes don't think they're worth much anymore.
You know, one thing you had on here from last year was the rhino horn, which really bugs me because how we let that happen in today's world is just beyond me.
It's a really sad story because this was a really bad year for rhinos, and you can remove the horn and they'll still be alive, but they will die because of infection and you know, they're not going to make it. So it's been very disturbing to see that this is still going on. The trade is in the traditional Chinese medicine, and there's nothing special about rhino horn. I don't understand. So they're trying to take pretty exceptional measures with poachers, and it just doesn't look good.
It goes back to the Chinese medicine thing that people say doesn't cause any harm, quote unquote.
Right. They do the same thing with bears, too.
Yeah.
They keep bears in cages and milk them for their liver bile. And that's just a horrible, horrible torture for those animals. And that actually is declining because of public awareness. So hopefully you get more of these stories out and people become aware of them and don't stand for it anymore.
Well, then, you have anti-vax stuff, which I think has been covered so much by the skeptical movement that it's not even something that people don't know about. But people didn't know that Andrew Wakefield, he kind of got completely dinged.
Yeah, he tried to sue the journalist and the publication that made this fantastic expose about all his exploits, and that got bumped out. So there were rumors that he was going to appeal, but really he has nothing left. And I don't know if he's gone for good. I sure hope so. I think this was a pretty good year where the anti-vax is starting to swing down and the positive vaccine ideas are on the rise again, because we had those incidents where measles and pertussis were outbreaks. So hopefully people are now beginning to turn away from that ridiculous rhetoric about vaccines being dangerous and realize that we really do need them as a public health measure.
Maybe if people like Bill Maher and Jenny McCarthy stop talking about the fact that they don't work.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and you also had some things about psychics, the Marx family.
The Marx family is a nationwide system of psychics, it seemed. It was very interesting because when I started pulling these stories from the news, that name kept coming up.
Yeah.
And then I started to see that they were a family. They called themselves gypsies. And what they do for a living is they feel that they have psychic powers. And they also act as life coaches for people, rather wealthy people.
Yeah.
And they got busted in a few states for fraud. So if they got busted in one state, they would go to another state, and they would move around. And they really got slammed in Florida. And they tried these different tactics. For one, they said that their form of spiritualism was a religion, so they should be allowed to practice it because it was under religious freedom. I'm not sure that's going to fly either. They committed fraud. They took people's money and they didn't give anything back. So hopefully, again, getting those stories out and telling people, look, if you feel that you're being taken by this psychic, you need to go to the police. Don't be embarrassed. You need to go, and because they're probably fleecing somebody else too. And
continue the litany of depressing things that happened last year. At least it was last year. There was some kids killed in exorcism.
Right. Sometimes you hear these stories about children who they undergo an exorcism by their family where they're suffocated or they're starved. And in one case in the UK, a family thought that their nephew was possessed or was a witch, and they beat him to death, a teenager. It's just horrible. And it's often the children who are suffering.
That's kicking it old school.
It was just awful.
Yeah.
And in one case, a pregnant woman was killed because...
Yeah, I saw that one.
Yeah, that was just another horrible story. And it seemed to be a case of them bringing old world ideas of superstitions to areas in the modern world where we're just appalled by this. How could you be in the Dark Ages and still believe that this person has demons? They have a psychological problem. They need medical care.
Hey, Sarah Palin, before the election, when she was running, she had a witch doctor from Africa to come to get rid of her demons so she would win. So, it's still live and well.
Surprisingly, yes.
Yeah, it's just amazing to me. And our good friends at the Church of Scientology, if you can call it a church, the cult of Scientology, which is really what it is, there was deaths involved with that?
Scientology had a terrible year. This is good news. Scientology is really on the downturn. They've lost a lot of members who have defected or come out and says that there's problems in the organization. Now, the Narconon clinics are their drug treatment centers. And they had, I think, 4 deaths in their centers last year because it's just really not a great way to treat for drug addiction. And these people were not cared for in the correct way, and for various causes they died. So in Georgia, incidentally, they're at risk of losing their license to run these clinics. So definitely is good news. Narconon needs to be out. They're not a safe way to do this.
Well, there's a big hubbub in my area because the Alpharetta and Roswell area, which I live in, Scientology has been trying to get a church here, and the people here, the city councils and things, they won't give them the permit to build, and they're trying to make a big stink about it. So it's a big deal here in Georgia.
I think that the media coverage of the weird things of Scientology has really helped people get this idea that they're not a church. They're often sound like a money-making venture. And they're very litigious. They like to sue people, and they like to give people a hard time. So it's strange.
I'd like to know when the last time the Catholic Church tried to sue somebody.
Right. Scientologists, that's their method.
Yeah. That's their collection plate.
Yeah.
the court system.
And celebrities.
Yeah, well. Yeah, we've seen that. Jumping on couches and things.
Yep.
Then another thing that's close to my heart, because I'm in the industry of water, the anti-fluoride stuff came back in vogue last year.
It really did.
It amazes me every time.
It was surprising. This had been an issue that was long ago decided.
Yeah.
Fluoridation is a valid health measure. And I was particularly interested in this one because I work in environmental policy, and I saw that the issue with putting fluoride in people's drinking water was that they felt they had no control over it. And whenever you do something like that and you take control away from people, that really upsets them. And at that point, I don't think they were considering the science behind it, because there was some blocking in their brain that said, the government is doing something against my will, and the science didn't really matter. So no matter how many times you told them that using fluoride in the water was very good for children, and it was a huge positive, they couldn't get past that point where the government was poisoning them.
What I love about that whole freak out is that why don't people freak out about chlorine, because it's just as bad.
Right.
And
absolutely necessary.
Yeah. So if you look at these side effects, if you drink a bunch of chlorine or drink pure fluoride, they're going to kill you, both of them. And people don't freak out about chlorine, but, fluoride, they go crazy over.
Yeah, it's very complicated issues when you're talking about that type of policy thing. And there were a couple of propaganda pieces that came out that fluoride in the water decreases your IQ. Well, when you look at those studies that they cited in that press release, it didn't match what they were actually saying. So what we try to do is call those things out and say, you need to look at these news stories a little bit more carefully because they're trying to pull one over on you.
Well, only that, a lot of people don't realize that a lot of times we remove the fluoride and then we put some back in, because fluoride in drinking water is quite natural. In many areas, not everywhere, but many areas, it's really bad. And there's some people that are still around. Actually, when I work with a few of them who, when they were younger, before the fluoride was put on the water, they got the fluoridosis in their teeth. So their teeth have that permanent stain to them because the water had so much fluoride in it, and they didn't die when they had too much of it. Right. So people don't realize that it's natural. We actually, a lot of times, we take it out and then we put back the appropriate amount to make it for the health reasons, but we take it out as well.
Right, and there's some areas in Pennsylvania especially that have naturally high well water with arsenic in it. Yeah. Which is also very bad, but people love their natural well water. They don't realize that there's dangerous stuff in there.
Yeah.
The naturalist's fallacy.
Oh, yeah. The natural water, the stuff that the deer and the bears and the squirrels and the birds, they poop in.
Right.
Yeah, they pee in it. Yeah, that's natural. I would rather not have that.
No.
We also had the cancer clinic man.
Right.
Yeah.
Brzezinski was a thorn in our side this year. And one thing that's interesting about covering stories about cancer patients, Brzezinski's cancer patients, is they're often children, and the story is just incredibly sad.
Yeah.
So when you have to come out with the story and say, look, this poor child is being subjected to this treatment that we know doesn't work, is costing a lot of money, and is taking away time from her to spend with her family in her last days, you can't look good saying stuff like that.
Oh, yeah.
It's very difficult, and you get people harassing you. And I have gotten contacted by the Brzezinski people, along with many other skeptics who have. in the beginning of, or at the end of last year, we actually they hired a PR guy to go around and harass all the bloggers. We were actually involved in that as well. So they're a very strange group of people who we really feel are exploiting people for their money for a treatment that has never been shown to work.
Well,
so it's extremely sad.
If you learn what's in the treatment, you can't imagine that anybody would actually do it.
Yeah, it's sort of chemotherapy in a way.
Yeah, I mean, but not in a medical way.
Yeah, and not in a way that works.
Yeah.
Well, right.
And last up to have you on is one of my favorite stories from last year, because I can't imagine, because it started at the end of 2011 and it started at the beginning of 2012, and it just hung on for a while. Then law got involved, was the electromagnetic sensitivity with the Wi-Fi and such, which was, this one bugs me, because this is like, proves to me that we have no science education in this country in the younger years, because if you can prove that Wi-Fi has anything to do with hurting you, you've just proven Einstein wrong.
Oh, right. These stories were crazy. People were suing cities, municipalities for $1 billion. It was costing school districts money to fight lawsuits because a parent said that they didn't want Wi-Fi in the schools. That there was an experiment on their children. We're surrounded by these electromagnetic waves every day, all around us, and we're living longer than ever.
Yeah, well, people don't realize that Einstein proved that there's a certain frequency or amount of power, energy it's required to break a bond of DNA.
Right.
And therefore,
damage, right?
None of this can happen. Same with cell phones, the same thing. It's like you can put the cell phone, inside your head. It's still kind of not give you cancer. The cell phone in your head would actually kill you first.
And yet there are people who go and live in caves.
Yeah.
Or paint the insides of their house with special type of paint, which is a booming business now, to shielding your house from electromagnetic frequencies. And people are opposing smart meters on their houses because of the same reason. They're afraid that it affects them, whereas they're missing their energy savings and making it easier for the utility companies to regulate the energy flow. It's just, there's no good reason for this, but you really can't use science against people who have a non-scientific idea about what's going on.
Yes, I'm afraid of electromagnetic rays, and yet I turn on my microwave, as I call the LCSC, to complain about it.
Mm-hmm.
It's shocking to me.
Yes.
So, do you have any predictions for what's going to be crazy in 2013?
Usually I would say I can never guess, because the stories that come out are just so freaky and weird sometimes that you just don't know. People believe the darndest things, and you just can't believe it sometimes. Wow, people really believe this stuff.